Maggie put Edward in the car, and when they got home, they played a game. The game was tic-tac-toe. Maggie grew up and she had a kid, and she gave it to her daughter. Her name was Riley. Riley said, "I love him, and I will never lose him." She named him Edward, so Edward was so happy because he was a boy and his name is Edward. Edward loved her too. Riley said that I don't want to give him away when I am older. Maggie said, "That's okay, you can keep him as long as you want."
When Evelyn bought Edward Tulane, she took him home, and Edward was so surprised that he turned into a real bunny. Maggie saw that Edward was moving. She said, "Mom, look, Edward is moving." So they went to the vet and made sure he wasn't sick. And he was so tiny, he only weighed about 2 pounds and wasn't even a year old yet. So they got a free coupon and went to the pet store. They bought a lot of stuff for Edward, said Maggie. Maggie said, "Edward is going to be spoiled." They bought a cage, clothes, blanket, his own room, food, water, dish, and some blankets. So Maggie had Edward in her hands the whole time. Maggie was holding Edward, and Edward didn't even need to try to move. Then they went home. "There's something I want to tell you. Edward will not die until he is 100, and he can sleep in your room." And she was just like Sarah. She rocked him, she didn't squeeze him, she took him everywhere. Then when they got to their house, Evelyn said, "You can have Edward, but don't lose him." They never lost him.
Evelyn bought Edward and on the way met Bryce. Evelyn told him everything she knew about Edward. Bryce lived with them because he didn't know the way back the end.
Evelyn and her brothers bought Edward. They went out and went to their car. When they got home, Maggie and her mom hugged Edward, and then they went outside. Maggie dropped Edward. He fell and landed on his feet and walked around, and then Evelyn picked him up and threw him, and he flew. Edward said, "Thank you," and he flew up into the night sky. So Maggie, Evelyn, and Edward went home to go to Evelyn's house. They were all there, all the people who once owned him, who once was with him, and once was who owned him. They all hugged him, and he felt the most powerful thing in the world: love. 5 minutes later, he was a bunny, a real bunny. So they all had him as a pet. Well, Edward got one wish, and that was if Sarah Rose would be here. And she was good as new, baby. Was good as new. He said, "It's the best day ever, and the best day in the world." And, well, it felt like he was brand new. The world was so much better than it was before, and he felt fourth emotion. It was true love. They took Edward home, and she said, "Mom, I love Edward." And the mom said, "Take very good care of him." And she said, "I will." And Maggie took Edward everywhere, to the zoo, to the park. At the zoo, she showed him every animal, and on the scary animals, she hugged Edward very tight. And at the park, Edward sat on Maggie's lap when they went down the slide, and Abilene pushed Maggie and Edward on the swings. Maggie loved Edward, and they went home, and Abilene tucked them in bed, and Maggie passed Edward down to her kids, and they kept passing it down, and they always tell their kids to be careful because who knows when Edward's going on another adventure.
The Living Dream ending by Tara. That's me. Edward got to the house and screamed, but Abilene didn't hear him. Edward stopped screaming, and he screamed for no reason. He dreamed about flying and having beautiful wings. Then when Edward woke up, he looked at himself, then looked at his back. Then he said, "How amazing am I?" Because he had wings for real life. He had wings, and Edward had a happily ever after because he was really happy and he enjoyed his life. Abilene takes him home and Abilene lets Maggie have him. Maggie names him Chris Cart. Maggie sleeps with him. Then when Maggie is 11, Abilene tells Maggie the story of the princess and how she is turned into a warthog. Maggie tells stories to them when they go to sleep. Then Maggie brings them to the zoo and she dropped him. The zookeeper thought that he was a real bunny. Then Maggie found him in the rabbit cage. Then when the people were not looking, Maggie jumped into the rabbit cage and got him out, and he was a real bunny. They got him a rabbit roller coaster and lived happily ever after. Abilene takes Edward home, and Abilene gave Edward his pocket watch. And she told Maggie that Edward was her toy, and she said that she lost him overseas, and she said that Maggie could have Edward. They went to the zoo and they went to the bunny's place. Maggie accidentally dropped Edward in the bunny cage, and so the zookeeper said, "Ooh, I love that new bunny. We got a new I love that new bunny. We got a new bunny."
So Abilena saw a sign, "A bunny for sale." Abilena hurried to go faster to the store, but a little boy almost bought him, but he did not have enough money to buy it for him. So Abilena bought it for her little girl. They went on a vacation. Edward looked out of the window on the plane. He fell out of the window. Oh no, he fell into the water. Splash went the water. Abilene and Edward looked at each other. Edward noticed Abilene had his pocket watch on. Abilene took Edward home, and his name was back to Edward. Abilene dressed Edward in long pants, a sweatshirt, and a hat. Edward felt as if more people loved him. Abilene took Edward to the park with Maggie. Now that Edward had feelings, he felt really happy. When they got home, Abilene gave Edward to Maggie. She hugged him and gave him a kiss. Every night when Maggie went to bed, she gave him a kiss on the cheek. It felt like somebody was trying to smell him, and Abilene tucked him as tight as she could go. Edward was so happy. Edward, Abilene, and Maggie had an awesome life forever.
Maggie and her mom bought Edward. In the car, Maggie named Edward Eddie. Maggie loved Eddie till one night a robber came and stole Eddie. Eddie was never saw again till one day when Maggie and her mom was driving downtown. Maggie saw a sign on Elmer Street that said, "Bunny for sale, hurry." Maggie and her mom rushed to that house. They were right on time. A little boy almost bought Eddie. So they bought Eddie, and in the car, Maggie kissed Eddie on the cheek. She said, "I missed you, Eddie." And when they got home, it was dinner time. Eddie loved the carrots. When he went to bed, he dreamed of flying with Maggie forever. Edward was sitting on the shelf, and then she took Edward off the shelf. Maggie looked at Edward, then she started rocking Edward. Maggie took Edward home to play with Edward, and her mother said, "I had a rabbit just like that, and it will go down for centuries."
Edward went home with Abilene and her daughter and played a board game with Abilene's daughter and Abilene. Edward was happy to be home with his family. Maggie got to play with Edward and kept him until she lost him at the bottom of the sea when Maggie had the window open on the plane. For 222 years, and no one rescued him.
So after they bought Edward, then Maggie took him to her room, and her mom says, "Pack your bags, we're going to Memphis." Maggie packs her clothes. They lived in Memphis for about 2 years. One day, Edward saw a fairy, and the fairy said, "I will give you 3 wishes." Edward says, "I wish for Sarah to be alive."
Abilene and her daughter Maggie both bought Edward, and then they went home and played the game Goldfish and went to bed. In the morning at 12 o'clock they went to Chuck E. Cheese.